And welcome to today's Ukraine War Update Extra second extra, the extra video, because my first one, as ever, was just way too long. So I had to split it into two. I must stop talking so much. This is Ukraine War Update Extra, giving you the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the Ukraine war. Enjoy or be informed or something. Enjoy is an odd word to say when you're talking about war and you're talking about the death of people. And we must remember, this is my kind of weekly reminder that lines on a map indicate people who have died. And the destruction of the weaponry on both sides is just scarily awful, horrific. So, bear that in mind as I talk about what different weapons can do, what weapons we should throw at Ukraine to support them, because we are saying we should support them in how they kill as many other human beings as possible in the most efficient and timely manner, and that sentence is a pretty horrific thing to say. And this is the reality of war. Uh, so really now it should be at the point of how do we stop the war as quickly as possible? Well, just give up and surrender. Yeah, okay. How do we stop the war as quickly as possible where the right side prevail? And moral rectitude prevails. Well, that is, oddly enough, throwing as many weapons into the theatre as possible for the Ukrainians to use to win on the battlefield and to win quickly uh, and efficiently. That's what that means. Anyway, that's me banging on. Here's the rest of the video. And now on to Crimea. Crimea is a decisive terrain, says Ben Hodges, former general. Make it untenable for Russian forces and they'll be compelled to leave. Long-range precision weapons are essential to doing this, along with a large amount armoured force that will sever the land bridge and isolate Crimea. This is in response to Ukraine battle map saying giving Ukraine a couple of ATACMs to hit the Crimean bridge and other logistical routes would help Ukraine a lot and significantly decrease the supply of Russian equipment to the front. Now, I'm going to go one further than this. So here's a bit of me armchair generaling. Okay, so bear with me. I would suggest Crimea is not a big place, right? Yes, of course, it's fairly large, but in a whole scheme of things, compared to the whole of Ukraine, Crimea is not a big place. And what I mean by this is that if you had ATACMs, you can hit anywhere in Crimea. You could hit the Kerch Bridge. So my theory would be this: to give Ukraine, I don't know, a couple of hundred ATACM missiles and set up all their HIMARS, GMLRS systems, or I think it's HIMARS systems for those, and they can shoot their load, so to speak. They can fire all of those ATACMs at Crimea, and just over the course of a couple of days, like do a saturation attack, take it, use up all the air defense, and then hit the air defenses, and then take out every key installation you can over a 2-day period of Crimea, including the Kerch Bridge, including the 2 rail lines into Crimea. If you hobble every single bit of logistics into Crimea and then hit airports and troop accumulations and supply depots and all sorts, you can take Crimea out of the game. You could hit some of the naval installations in Sevastopol. You could hit places around Simferopol, so on and so forth. If you gave ATACMs and had a concerted 2-3 day missile attack on Crimea, you could take Russia. Arguably, you could take the whole point of them. Really, what they want is one, Crimea, so they can have a naval port and access to the Black Sea in a meaningful way. With a decent enough port, and 2, a land bridge to Crimea. Crimea is a bit of a jewel in the crown, I guess, for Ukraine. Now, if you severed that land bridge, you can do all that HIMARS and then sever the land bridge with an attack down past Melitopol, maybe, or through Vukovar area to Mariupol, whatever your strategy might be, or your intentions might be. I'd say a land bridge, HIMARS, and then that is game over for Russia. I think that would be so important for winning this victory for Ukraine, and that's basically what what Hodges is saying here. Crimea is the decisive terrain. Make it untenable for Russian forces, and they'll be compelled to leave. You hit that, and you not just hit that, but then they know you've got ATACMS. They know that at any point they can hit anywhere in Crimea, and there's no answer to HIMARS, right? Russians have had no answer to HIMARS. You're still having HIMARS operating. I don't know. Have any been hit? Are we seeing less HIMARS? Maybe. Or is it that Russians have just moved stuff back? Well, you give them ATACMS or something similar, and suddenly everything changes, and Ukraine have the upper hand. That is the game changer for me. We can talk all day long about tanks, but I just go back to longer range ordnance, longer range missiles is the next game changer. And my opinion is, that's what needs to be given to Ukraine. Tout de suite. Right, for no particular reason other than I think it's quite interesting to see this. I showed you some footage of the Terminator the other day, just to remind you what that is. A T-72 chassis with different armaments on top, but the one I'm going to show you has certainly got these two 30mm autocannons, just to show you how vicious these autocannons can be. I don't know if this isn't the same footage that I showed you, just from a different angle. So I showed it to you the other day from above, from drone footage. Well, this looks like it could be the same Terminator shooting through the trees. So armaments they can include, or here it says 4 launchers with 130mm anti-tank guided missiles, ATGM, 2 30mm cannons with 850 rounds, either 2 AG-17D or AGS-30 30mm grenade launchers with 600 rounds, and 1 7.62 PKTM machine gun with 2,000 rounds. That's probably coaxial. So that one's probably goes with a turret. Well, actually, I don't know. I think that those 30mm look like they do. They're not standalone. So anyway, yeah. So let's have a look at this footage, and it is, unfortunately, there's like metal music, and nothing wrong with metal. I like my metal myself and rock. Hey, there you go. But I don't want it over the top of every single video I watch. So this is the Terminator here, kicking it into action. You just wouldn't want to be in that tree line, like facing this. This is pretty. I mean, it would just be incredibly scary, and unfortunately, you can't hear the sound of it, but the sound of that. Let's just confirm. Yeah, that is just. I mean, poor trees. This is picking a fight with the trees, for sure here, and those rounds are ripping through, and you can see just fires starting in the trees, possibly up there, and I don't know. Pretty scary stuff. I wouldn't like to be charging towards this clearing from inside the woods and being met with those. They'd absolutely rip through human bodies. It's just incredibly destructive. Weaponry there as it goes off, and this is arguably what it looks like from the other side, or at least from the side. No, this is this is in darkness, the autocannons doing their thing, and wow, just incredible. Oh, if you've got epilepsy, I do apologise, and that's not going to help, is it? So as Defamon says here, Russian BMPT, the Terminator fighting the trees. Just a pretty incredible bit of footage, that. Okay, let's move on to a bit of. I show you an awful lot of Ukrainian forces doing well. Well, this is the Lancet that is still the thorn in the side of Ukrainians here. 2 M777 A2 155mm towed howitzers. So these are towed guns that have been provided for Ukraine. M777 are decent bits of kit. 2 are destroyed. 1 is damaged by Russian Lancet loitering munitions, allegedly around Crimea. This is again the Russians. The Ukrainians don't seem to have a great answer to these Lancet loitering munitions. There is a Switchblade 300. I've seen some footage of that recently, actually, a couple of the last few days. But they will just hit men individually. Will take out like 1 or 2 men. But the 600 Switchblade 600, not seen any footage of that. I've seen a few bits of loitering munitions that are made from FPV drones, first person view drones, that have had IEDs basically placed on them, improvised explosive devices, maybe the warhead to a rocket propelled grenade launcher munition. Um, but I've not seen anything like the Lancet, and I think Ukraine really needs to get on that. Again, more music in the background. I'll turn it off. That's very low there. So yeah, these bits of artillery, yeah, they're a big loss when they go. Any bit of equipment is, but you can see that if it hits the right place, sometimes these Lancets are fairly ineffective. So I've seen a howitzer I've shown you before where it just hits a wheel and punctures a tire, and that's the most it does. But if you manage to hit some uh, munition there, like you can see those shells there. Now, if you hit them, big explosion, one would assume. But this, I would have thought that howitzer would be unusable. But again, it'd be interesting to see as that the explosion looks mainly like that's the explosion of the Lancet. Be interested to see how much damage to something like that even a direct hit does if it doesn't explode any munition that might be in it. That could be what we saw with the explosion before. Could be one loaded in the barrel exploding. I don't know, but the barrel is still. Look at that. So when you look at that, um, yeah, when you look at that, that's interesting. I I wonder, yeah, how much of that is still usable, whether it can be fixed up, whether it could be cannibalized for use elsewhere. Um, coming on to Prigozhin and the Wagner force. So Russia's elite shadow army edges into complete collapse, says the Daily Beast. Shannon Vavra, national security reporter, reports how some indications could be, and again, is this really looking at this very positively? Is this a Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian spin? But there, you start joining stuff together. So this morning, I showed you this thread, which indicates that Wagner Group are finding difficulties getting new recruits. They need recruits. They've been hit hard, certainly in their convicts, maybe not the core, maybe 10,000 Wagner trained Wagner personnel that they have, but these other ones. So that now they're going into prisons in Asia, maybe talking about joining with the Kadyrovites, the Chechens. But then there's all this kind of internal politics going on, and they don't really like the Kadyrovites. And according to the VCHK OGPU source, that's a Telegram channel, Wagner's leadership is concerned that the Russian government will try to reduce Yevgeny Prigozhin's influence by, quotes, attempts to cosplay Wagner and breed private military companies, dilute its identity and steal its best personnel. However, Wagner intends to resist with its usual brutal disciplinary methods. Quote, Wagner's security forces are already saying that termination of the contract to switch to another PMC will be seen as treason and or with all its consequences. In other words, if they do kind of have a bleed to other PMC groups or other whatever, then that's punishable by death in terms of Wagner. So all these shenanigans going on with regards to recruiting, whether they're going to be merged with other lot, because this is a kind of power play of the Russian MOD as they try and regain a semblance of authority and discipline and competence on the battlefield. So going back to the Daily Beast article, tens of thousands of fighters rounded up to fight in Ukraine for Wagner Group, the Russian private mercenary fighting corps, have gone missing or died, according to Russian non-governmental organization. While Wagner Group recruited approximately 50,000 fighters in recent months, including from prisons, only 10,000 fighters remain fighting at the front for Wagner. Olga Romanova, the head of Russian Behind Bars, told My Russian Rights, according to the Moscow Times. That's a media organization which is now in exile. According to our data, 42 to 43,000 prisoners were recruited by the end of December. Now they are most likely already over 50,000, Romanova said. Of these, 10,000 are fighting at the front because all the rest are either killed or missing or deserted or surrendered. So the statistics cited is just the latest indication that Wagner's fighting forces falling apart in Ukraine, even as Russia works to secure wins on the battlefield almost 1 year on from the invasion of Ukraine. That's really interesting. So all the success in Soledar and around Bakhmut has come at a cost. There's also reports that the Wagner um, cemetery has increased sevenfold. So they've got some cemetery behind the lines that is just getting overused because there are so many losses of these troops. But as you know, Willie OEM interview uh, told you, if you listen to that, it is arguably the convicts who are dying in these waves of human waves of attacks, and the highly trained Wagner personnel themselves are not dying in the same sort of in the same ratios. Wagner has also been largely responsible for gains made in Bakhmut nearby at an extraordinary cost, given that many of the Wagner recruits had minimal training since Wagner recruited 40,000 convicts. John Kirby, a White House National Security Council coordinator, told reporters last week. Carry on later, it says there are indications that some of these losses may be desertions. Earlier this month, one former member of Wagner Group, Andrei Medvedev, was caught fleeing to Norway, the AFP reported. So this is quite a famous case of a guy getting across, being chased and getting across the border into Norway. Medvedev, who has been arrested, is believed to be the first of Wagner to defect to the West, according to the BBC. Medvedev has offered to share details about his experiences in the private mercenary group to help expose war crimes for investigators, the AFP reported. He has reportedly witnessed deserters being executed and terroristic methods. News of Wagner's disintegration comes as a mercenary group is experiencing trouble with the Kremlin as well. So this is power play between Putin and the Russian MOD and Prigozhin and Wagner PMC. Putin appears to have begun trying to shift the heft of Russia's fighting back to the military in recent weeks. The president shook up the command of Russia's armed forces earlier this month by promoting General Valery Gerasimov in an apparent attempt to inject some momentum into Russia's military strategy. So this is, interesting assessment. I think that Bakhmut has been somewhat successful for the Russians, as in they have taken some ground. The Ukrainians have been attrited to a large degree, I think, there, but at a huge cost in Russian lives. And whether they are culminating now, the Wagner, that is, not necessarily the Russian military themselves, could take over from Wagner and continue the momentum. But Wagner themselves, I think, probably, as ISW have stated, I think they probably have culminated. They are really struggling now, but they do have an advantage if you are to take the Willie OEM interview seriously, as I think you should. I think they do have an advantage with the core Wagner personnel, like the well-trained ones, in terms of better equipment than the Ukrainians, higher tech. They're using a lot of Chinese drones, and they're really linking them up very well, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, interesting one. Now, brings me to the end of what I'm going to say, which is going to be about this kind of war of attrition strategizing. Now, I'm going to refer you back to this Willie OAM interview of a disguised Australian soldier who's been fighting in the Bakhmut area against Wagner PMC, and some of the revelations he comes up with. Again, it's all about verifiability and about whether the claims are representative of Bakhmut as a whole and all the units fighting in all the different places around Bakhmut and the front lines as a whole. And the issues he has with the Ukrainian military are the issues that he has with his geographic location in a very explicit way, in a very localized way, or does it stretch further? Very interesting things that he says. Yeah, I'd just like loads more detail and loads more conversation about that. But one of the things that I've been saying for some time, which he talks about, is the idea that it's a numbers game, right? That Russia have a whole load more people than Ukraine. You know, it's a bigger country geographically and also in terms of population. And it can mobilize and mobilize and mobilize, throw troops at the problem, and you can have some kind of Pyrrhic victory that represents just a greater human resource. Ukraine has a large number of reserves who have had combat experience on the front lines, but they are going. So Russia are attriting the Ukrainian troops. I mean, there's no doubt about it that Ukraine are losing a lot of troops as well. Some people claim it's sort of 1 to 1, others 3 to 1. Whatever the number is, right? And I personally think Russia are losing, are almost certainly losing more, but to what degree, I'm not sure. When you look at things like, so it could be on the front lines that it's broadly a 1 to 1, maybe 1 to 1.3, maybe 1 to 1.5, whatever. But I think then when you start adding the HIMARS hits that Ukraine does that Russia don't do, so this is a competitive advantage of having HIMARS, that you get an asymmetry then starting to develop in terms of loss of troops. So if you're hitting troop accumulations night after night after night, and is going to start hurting when 600 troops are taken out in one fell swoop, then that will show a difference in figures lost. But when it comes to the battlefront fighting, it could be that the Ukrainians still have an advantage by being on a defensive, say take Bakhmut. So it could be that they are still losing one to every two or three of the Russians there, but they're still losing a lot of people, and that will still give a real headache for them in terms of losing that expertise, that knowledge, that experience on the battlefield, and to replace that with people that are barely out of training. But there are two things going on here. This is a war of attrition in terms of troops as human resources, but it's also a war of attrition in terms of the economy. And whoever loses on each front, yeah, there are two ways that you can lose this war, which is one, you just run out of troops, you run out of the will to fight the war, that you just don't have anything left in the tank. That's your attritional war. But there's this economic, you could call it a more of a strategic economic war, but it's an attritional war in terms of money. It's who runs out first. Now, the difference is where the West aren't pouring troops in. We'll throw tanks and maybe planes and IFVs and money, but we won't throw troops. So we can't help with the attritional war in terms of human resources, but we can help with the attritional war concerning money. Now, it depends where China's going to position themselves here. But assuming China don't get involved, with monetary assistance to Russia, then really Ukraine are in a massive economic advantage. Yes, their own economy might be on its knees, I mean, absolutely suffering. It might have to be propped up by the West, and we might be paying hand over fist for this. But Russia, uh, looking at their budget going forward and looking at how the sanctions are starting to cut and looking at how the price cap for crude is taking effect, it could well be that there's more chance that Russia lose the war on the economic front rather than the military front. Um, they want this prolonged war, but the prolonging the war is going to hurt in terms of human resources both sides, but they probably think that they can outlast the Ukrainians. But can they outlast them in money in the coffers? Can they outlast them? Yes, they've got endless natural resources, but if they aren't getting enough money for those natural resources, you start producing more of them, supply and demand, you're actually getting less money per unit of them because that's how supply and demand works. So, but then you're getting capped on selling that around the world. And if people aren't buying that at the price that you budgeted for, then you're going to have a budgetary black hole and you have a nation to pay for. So there's a really interesting dynamic going on here, and it's worth considering which of those two fronts one side will lose. I don't think Ukraine will lose on the financial side, but that does depend on other countries propping up. And it does depend on prolonged financial support of Ukraine. So there is that to consider. But on the human front, Russia would be looking to win. So Ukraine have got two options really: wait to win on the economic front, or do something else that overcomes the lack of human resources, and that has to be success in military maneuvers. It has to be outdoing Russia in terms of the tech they are using, like the capacity of their armed forces, longer range missiles, upping the tech levels, getting better tanks, getting whole offensive uh, battalions in place of better tech where you can, yeah, you may have more humans than us, but we can more efficiently destroy, your capacity, and we can do that, yes, from military assistance from the West, as well as getting financial assistance. So all those things to consider. Let me know what you think before I start rambling too much. Thank you for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much for the people who have been so generous to my channel. For example, a huge shout out to Hutch and Medlin on Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal support from Andrew Streatham, Keith Hilliard, Dimitri Valentin. Again, just huge thanks to all of you for being really supportive of what I do. It literally enables me to do this. I know that sounds whatever. Yeah, it's always uncomfortable doing this kind of stuff, but honestly, without that, I wouldn't be here doing what I do. So thank you very much. But for all of you, I keep saying this: the conversation in the threads, you are responsible for my life being spent looking at my phone at comments on threads to my videos, because there's such good quality of comments that I just can't stop reading them, and then you are using up my life. So, but anyway, thank you. Speak to you tomorrow.